you can go to the website of the Ministry of Environment of India and find these public hearings, the documentation. As a result of which we put a stop to it. It has a moratorium. Every few weeks there's an attempt to remove the moratorium. We have reached a position, a point where appropriation of resources, whether it be biodiversity or sea or land or water, can now only be done through violence. The first Columbus needed violent invasions. The new coming of Columbus needs a militarized appropriation. And the day after we won the moratorium on the BT egg plant, there's been an attempt to replace our existing environment protection law for genetic engineering with a new biotechnology regulatory authority law, which would deregulate biotechnology. But it has a clause which says anyone who raises questions of genetic engineering can be thrown into jail for 2 years and fined 200,000 rupees. This is such a vivid example in a land as democratic as India that you cannot build markets for something people don't want without creating a form of dictatorship. And with every passing day, the struggle for democracy and the struggle for freedom becomes more precious to me. The very way in which we produce our food has become so violent. But just look at the scenes of this year. Began with the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Look at the fires in Russia where it should be 4 degrees centigrade and it was 40 degrees centigrade. Or the floods in Pakistan that killed 2,000 people. The Indus has never had floods of that scale. Never. The Ganga gets it. Therefore, Bangladesh, Bengal in India, Bihar, flood-prone areas. But have you ever heard of Indus floods? Have you ever heard of floods in Pakistan? This was a combination of climate instability and the dams releasing their water. In the same, when the Indus starts from Ladakh, and the region of Ladakh is a desert. It's a high altitude desert. It shouldn't have rain. It got so much rain that there were flash floods and 200 people were washed away. Or more recently, when I opened the newspaper and saw those scenes with that red mud in Hungary. The first thing is, of course, it looks like blood. But it is the blood of the earth. Because, this shiny metal, I don't know where it is, but aluminium has become so common. The making of aluminium is a lethal toxic process. First, you have to mine the bauxite. For every 2 tons of bauxite, 1 ton becomes alumina, 1 ton becomes waste, which is that red mud. And as you make more and more alumina, you have to have more and more red mud ponds. It's the only way they can deal with it, just keep making more ponds. As the disaster and the spill in Hungary showed, even though, just as they say genetically engineered organisms and foods are safe, they were saying this red mud is totally safe. Till it killed people and crippled them. I've seen the creation of this red mud in the alumina smelter of Vedanta, and it breaks my heart to see a really criminal corporation appropriate the term Vedanta, which means knowledge so high that it's beyond the Vedas. Vedanta is a UK company run by an Indian who ran away from India because he was caught in some financial scam. But he's come back, and ridden on the wave of globalization, which is about outsourcing. Everyone knows about outsourcing of software, and everyone knows about the fact that there's a Bangalore, which is now India's Silicon Valley. Most people don't know the biggest outsourcing is of polluting and energy-intensive industry. That is why Bethlehem, which used to have a steel plant and doesn't, right? Because we are making all the steel. We are making the aluminium. We're taking over all the pollution of the world. This outsourcing of pollution is part of the story of Vedanta being able to build a huge empire. And the bauxite that he wanted was lying in this beautiful mountain called Niyamgiri, which literally means the mountain that upholds universal law. And the ancient tribe called the Dongriya Kond have been saying since the beginning, this mountain is the very center of our worldview. It's our divine. And if you chop it up for bauxite, you're going to dismantle our very world. You might put us physically somewhere else, but we will be destroyed spiritually and culturally. Of course, there was a lot of interesting discussion because Vedanta corrupted every level of government, Supreme Court. They got approvals everywhere to start mining. But in addition to the fact that they got approvals, because people were resisting, they also started to use as many, Tatas for the steel relocation in Kalinganagar, killed 13 tribals who were resisting. Singur has had its own violence, which is why Tata could never make its car, the Tata Nano, in Singur. So everywhere in the country, you have these land wars exploding. And in the case of Niyamgiri, earlier this year, we decided to step in because the government was now stepping in with military operations in tribal areas. The justification was to keep in control the growing Maoist movement, the growth of extreme violence. But part of the intention was also to remove the tribals so that the resources could be exploited freely. And many of the tools that have been used in Latin America are now being reproduced in India. The militias, where you arm people to kill their own brothers and sisters. It's called Salvajudam in the state of Chhattisgarh. And we were getting very troubled about the rule of violence, the militarization, the militarized takeover of our tribals' resources, our farmers' resources, against the laws. Because we have laws that give rights. For example, the Forest Rights Act. So we started to do public hearings across the country. I started to do research myself. I went to Niyamgiri to celebrate the 5th of June, the World Environment Day. I went all over the forest, went to see these horrible red mud ponds. 8 had already been built. They wanted to increase their capacity from 1 million a year to 6 million tons a year, which would have meant they'd have had about 100 ponds in no time, and they would bust because they're just mud ponds. And then all the way down the rivers would have carried this toxic sludge like it's carried it to the Danube and started to kill people as well as fish life. I also realized that one of the big issues is people have huge struggles and nobody listens. The media blocks it out, nobody listens. So I did what I very often do. I said, we bring the tribals to Delhi. So Parliament must listen, the media must listen. Of course, they abducted 2 of the tribals on their way. They took away the cell phones of everyone who was coming. We still held the conference. I brought the top leaders of the Congress to listen. And committees were set up, they started. Once committees know, everyone knows, their reports turn out to be different. When they think nobody knows, everything's safe, Vedanta's fine, mining does no harm. And the minute we start to document, things start to shift. Last month, this mining order was reversed. And